I'm Amelia Price, and my study is on the effects of dynamic and static stretching over time on increasing squat depth. The squat movement, which recruits a variety of lower body muscles, is one of the most commonly used exercises in strength and conditioning to increase lower body strength. It has been shown that there is a connection between joint angle and muscle adaptation, and that muscle adaptations only improve at or near the joint angles being trained. This means that in order to increase strength through the full range of motion, exercises must be performed at maximal excursion of the joints. In order to achieve all of the desired effects of a squat, the movement must be performed at full range of motion. In order to increase squat depth, the range of motion within the involved joints, which are the hip, knee, and ankle, must be increased. In past research, an improvement of range of motion within joints has been made following a single stretch training session, whether that be dynamic stretching or static stretching. As for some past research, there has been some research done on the effects of different stretching protocols on different variables. One study I found showed an increase in peak force output in squat jumps and counter movement jumps following an active warm-up. This output was found to be higher than that of a passive warm-up in this study. Another study compared the effects of static stretching on jumping ability and found that there was no significant difference between static stretching and the control group in jumping ability. And lastly, one study found that when performing a sit and reach flexibility test, the flexibility of participants who performed a static stretching routine had a greater increase than those in the control group as well. There are some gaps in this research area. I found that there has been minimal research done on the effects of performing a stretching routine, dynamic or static, over time. I also found that many of the studies that compared a dynamic warm-up to a static warm-up or a static warm-up to a control group focused on power output as the dependent variable of interest. This was done through a 1 rep max back squat, as well as with a squat jump and a counter movement jump. With that, the purpose of my study is to compare the effects of dynamic stretching and static stretching on squat depth and determine which routine over time is more beneficial for increasing squat depth. So my first aim for the study is to determine if dynamic or static stretching is more beneficial for increasing hip, knee, and ankle angles in a squat. My hypothesis is that dynamic stretching will be more beneficial for increasing those angles. And my second aim is to determine if performing a stretching routine, whether that would be dynamic or static, outside of a performance warm-up setting over time, is beneficial for increasing hip, knee, and ankle angles in a squat. And my hypothesis for this aim is that performing a stretching routine over time will be beneficial for increasing those angles as well. As for limitations and delimitations, first is that participants must be on a sports team at Alma College. This is not including club sports or esports. The reasoning for this is that I would like the participants in this study to have some familiarity with the squat movement, as well as lifting in general. And for the most part, athletes here have been involved in some sort of strength and conditioning programming. This may pose an issue as some participants will have more lifting experience than others. Also, for this study, the participants will perform a body weight squat rather than a weighted squat. There will be a PVC pipe of the same approximate circumference of a barbell to mimic the back squat form, but without the addition of weight, which could lead to people compensating in their form or just injuries in general. And lastly, there is an issue of femur length, because the longer a person's femurs are, the more they have to lean their torso forward to keep the weight of the bar over the middle of their foot. To combat that variable, just the comparison of measures of joint angle from the baseline testing to the final testing will be used to determine squat depth. For this study, I will be using an experimental design to evaluate the pre- and post-intervention measure of joint angles in a squat. The independent variable in this study is whether the participant performs the dynamic stretching routine or the static stretching routine. The dependent variables are the joint angle of the hips, knees, and ankles. And there are some extraneous variables, being the femur length that I had just discussed, participants' current activity level, any previous injury they may have sustained, their age, gender, and also any lifting experience. My goal number of participants for this study is somewhere between 15 and 30 people. To be included, they must be a full-time student at Alma College and a member of a sports team, not including club sports or esports. The exclusion criteria includes if the participant is currently injured, if they have had any previous surgeries to the hip, knee, or ankle, and if they have any previous conditions that would affect the mobility of joints. As for equipment, there are resistance bands needed for some of the stretches in either routine, and some stretches also require that participants sit or lay on the ground, so a floor mat will be provided for those. There will also be the PVC pipe with a 1.25-inch circumference to be used during the squat to mimic a barbell. And for measures of joint angle, I will be using a goniometer. As for the procedure, before being assigned to a group, participants will complete a background survey to evaluate some of the extraneous variables I mentioned before, as well as collecting some demographic information. Once a participant has been determined to be eligible and they are assigned to either the dynamic stretching group or the static stretching group, they will arrive at the Alma College Human Performance Lab. They will complete the stretching routine, and then baseline joint angle will be measured in a series of 5 bodyweight squats. The participants will return to the lab 6 more times over the next 3 weeks, with at least 1 day between sessions to perform just the stretching routine. After these 6 visits, they will return to the lab 1 more time to perform the stretching routine and 5 bodyweight squats again, where the post-intervention joint angles will be measured. As for the stretching routines, I wanted to have similar movements being performed by each group, with just variations in the tempo of each exercise. And each routine will be performed 3 times in succession during each visit. For my first aim of seeing which routine is more beneficial for increasing the joint angles, I will be using a paired t-test for both the dynamic stretching group and the static stretching group to compare the pre and post interventions of each group individually. And for my second aim of seeing if performing either stretching routine over time is beneficial for increasing the joint angles, I will also be using a paired t-test to compare pre and post interventions of all participants as a collective group. And here are my references, and thank you.